Night has already settled over the city of Culiacan. Streetlights stretch across wide avenues as luxury SUVs move slowly through the streets. Music echoes from open doors, while phones light up with photographs that will soon spread across social media. To outsiders, it looks like a celebration. But inside those vehicles are men connected to one of the most powerful criminal organizations in Mexico. Among them sits a man whose reputation has already begun spreading far beyond the streets of Sinaloa. His name is José Rodrigo Arechiga Gamboa. But inside cartel circles, he is known by another name, El Chino Antrax. For years, investigators would associate that name with one of the most feared enforcement groups connected to the Sinaloa cartel, a group known as Los Antrax. Their role inside the organization was simple: protect leadership, maintain discipline, and confront rival groups when conflict emerged. In criminal organizations where loyalty can shift quickly and alliances change overnight, enforcement groups become essential. They operate as a protective shield around senior leadership. Their presence alone can prevent conflict before it begins, because rivals understand what those groups represent: speed, coordination, and the willingness to use violence when necessary. José Rodrigo Arechiga Gamboa was born in Culiacan, Sinaloa. For decades, the city had served as one of the most important centers of cartel power in Mexico. In this environment, organized crime was not something distant. It was woven into everyday life. Power carried reputation, and reputation carried influence. For many young men growing up in the region, connections to criminal networks often developed through personal relationships: friends, family ties, neighborhood alliances. These networks shaped opportunities long before individuals fully understood the risks. Over time, Arechiga Gamboa moved deeper into that world, and as his connections expanded, so did his reputation. Within the internal structure of the Sinaloa cartel, enforcement groups played a critical role. These units were responsible for protecting leadership and responding quickly to threats from rival organizations. In regions where cartel territories overlapped, conflict could erupt with little warning. Maintaining control required individuals capable of reacting quickly and decisively. Groups like Los Antrax developed reputations for discipline and coordination. Members often traveled together, maintained constant communication, and presented a unified presence wherever they operated. Within that structure, the profile of El Chino Antrax began to rise. His name became increasingly associated with the leadership of the group. But his rise happened during a moment when something new was beginning to reshape cartel culture: the internet. By the early 2000s, social media platforms were transforming how people presented themselves to the world. And inside certain criminal circles, that transformation had unexpected consequences. Photographs began appearing online, showing a lifestyle built around influence and wealth. Luxury vehicles parked outside nightclubs, designer clothing, weapons displayed beside symbols of power. Among the figures appearing in these images was El Chino Antrax. Unlike earlier cartel generations that preferred secrecy, this new generation often allowed their reputations to spread publicly. To supporters, the images represented status. To investigators, they represented evidence. Each photograph offered small pieces of information: locations, associates, patterns of movement. Gradually, the name El Chino Antrax began appearing not only online, but inside intelligence reports. In December of 2013, authorities located him far from the streets of Culiacan, Amsterdam, Schiphol Airport. Dutch police detained Arechiga Gamboa after identifying him through an international arrest request issued by the United States. For investigators who had spent years tracking cartel activity, the arrest represented a rare opportunity. One of the most visible figures associated with Los Antrax was now in custody. After legal proceedings in the Netherlands, he was extradited to the United States to face federal charges. But even as his case moved through the legal system, the larger organization he had once been associated with continued operating. Criminal networks rarely depend on a single individual. Their structures are designed to adapt. Roles shift. New figures emerge. Operations continue. Inside organizations like the Sinaloa cartel, leadership structures are built to survive disruption. Arrests may remove individuals from the field, but the systems behind them often remain intact. For investigators, this creates a constant challenge. Taking down a single figure does not necessarily dismantle the organization. Instead, it forces the network to reorganize. New commanders step forward, new alliances are formed, and the larger structure continues functioning. During the years that followed his arrest, the world surrounding El Chino Antrax continued changing. Violence between rival groups shifted across different regions of Mexico. Territories expanded and contracted as organizations competed for control of trafficking routes. The influence of the Sinaloa cartel remained significant, but the landscape around it was evolving. New groups emerged, old alliances fractured, and the balance of power continued shifting. Meanwhile, Arechiga Gamboa remained inside the American legal system. Cases connected to international trafficking networks can take years to resolve. Evidence must be reviewed, witnesses interviewed, legal agreements negotiated. The process moves slowly, but the consequences can be significant. Eventually, he entered into a cooperation agreement with authorities. Details of such agreements are rarely public in full, but they often involve providing information about criminal networks in exchange for reduced sentencing considerations. As part of that process, he was eventually released to house arrest in California. Electronic monitoring was used to track his movements. For a time, the arrangement appeared stable. From the outside, it looked like another chapter in a long legal process. But that stability would not last. In May of 2020, authorities discovered that the monitoring device attached to his ankle had been removed. El Chino Antrax had disappeared. The sudden disappearance immediately triggered concern among investigators. Escaping house arrest inside the United States is extremely difficult without assistance. Questions quickly began circulating. Had he received help from outside associates? Had he planned the disappearance in advance? Or had circumstances forced him to flee unexpectedly? For law enforcement agencies, the situation raised another possibility. If Arechiga Gamboa had returned to Mexico, he might now be entering an environment far more dangerous than the one he had left years earlier. Within criminal networks, reputations do not disappear when someone is arrested. They linger. Alliances shift. Old loyalties fade. New rivalries emerge. Returning to that world after years away can be unpredictable. Some individuals are welcomed back. Others discover that the balance of power has changed. In environments shaped by violence and distrust, the past does not always guarantee protection. For months, uncertainty surrounded his whereabouts. Speculation spread across media reports and criminal circles alike. Some believed he had quietly returned to Sinaloa. Others suspected he might attempt to disappear somewhere else entirely. But disappearing completely is rarely simple for someone whose reputation had once spread across social media and international investigations. Eventually, reports began emerging from Sinaloa. Authorities had discovered several bodies in a rural area outside Culiacan. Investigators believed one of them belonged to El Chino Antrax. Details surrounding the discovery remained unclear. Conflicting reports circulated about the events leading up to the deaths, but investigators eventually concluded that the remains likely belonged to the man who had disappeared months earlier. In the world of organized crime, endings often arrive suddenly. Careers built on reputation and fear can collapse in a single moment. For years, El Chino Antrax had been associated with influence inside one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the Western Hemisphere. His name circulated through intelligence reports. His image appeared across social media platforms. His reputation spread far beyond the city where he had grown up. But the same visibility that helped build that reputation may also have contributed to its downfall, because attention creates pressure. From investigators, from rivals, and sometimes from within the organizations themselves. Earlier generations of traffickers had relied on secrecy to survive. They avoided cameras. They avoided publicity. They avoided leaving traces that could be followed. But by the early 2000s, Technology had begun reshaping that dynamic. Images could travel instantly, names could spread across continents within seconds, and reputations could grow far beyond the territories where criminal networks actually operated. For some individuals, this visibility became a form of influence. It created mystique, followers, recognition. But it also created vulnerability. Because every photograph leaves clues, every appearance creates witnesses, every reputation attracts scrutiny. In the end, the story of Chino Antrax reflects a turning point inside cartel culture. Power was no longer always hidden. It was sometimes displayed, shared, broadcast. But visibility carries consequences. And in the world of organized crime, consequences often arrive without warning. The trajectory of Chino Antrax followed a pattern seen many times inside criminal networks. Rapid rise, public reputation, and a sudden, violent conclusion. Because in the world he inhabited, power rarely lasts forever. And the same forces that build reputations often contribute to their collapse.